Hey everyone, we're back and continuing with Judaism. Um, so here is where Abram started from, and he traveled through the Fertile Crescent and down into what is called uh, Canaan, which is now Israel. And this was a huge ask that um, God asked of Abram. Abram was very successful. Um, He had plenty of crops and he had plenty of flocks, and he was very successful, as I said. And he was older gentleman, and his wife was older. So to move was a huge ask, and particularly because he's moving so far from any kind of support system that he had known. Now, another thing here is that if I got a new job in like St. Louis or something like that, my family packed up and we moved to St. Louis, and we moved into our house, right? And within a couple of days, the ladies down the street are bringing casseroles and welcoming us to the neighborhood, right? And nosy or whatever. But that's not how it was back then, because you had to recognize that the resources in a particular place were pretty scarce. And so you were moving in and you brought all your flocks and you were looking for more farmland that probably somebody else owned. So when you moved into a new place, there was going to be conflict, and that was a major again, as I was describing how it's such a big ask it is. That's a big factor, is that they were moving to a place that wasn't theirs, and they were going to have to fight for it. So now Abraham, let's talk about this. Now we talk about Abram, right? He gets his name changed, just to give you a little bit of heads up. So he is considered the father of all religions. Um, and he makes this covenant with God, as I described before. I will be your God and you will be my people. And Abraham is promised, number one, that promised land of Canaan, divine protection, that God was going to have his back. And number three, descendants as many as the stars in the sky or the sand on the shore. And God changes Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai's to Sarah. Oftentimes, names change in order to show some new identity, some new relationship. We do that in a number of times, right? We give people names that match up with people who we want to identify, right? We name them. How many of you are named after, say, a grandparent or somebody who your parents wanted to honor? Um, and Catholics have a confirmation names where a person gets to choose a new name for themselves to represent somebody who they want to look up to, some new identity, some new transition in their life. Um, so one of the stories, and again, this is not about Abraham being like being the best person in the world. This is about God's protection and God's defending of this covenant, of this agreement with Abraham. So one story is there's a famine, and they go down to Egypt, and they're walking into Egypt, and Abram realizes that Sarah, who apparently was pretty hot, apparently, and he was worried that if the she was seen by somebody of any importance, she would be just taken from him and taken into some harem. And and if he was her husband, they would just kill the husband and take the woman. Well, so he arranged it with Sarah. Let's agree that I am your brother, and that way, then they won't kill me. They'll look to pay me if that terrible thing happens. So sure enough, the Pharaoh of Egypt sees Sarah and he covets her, and he brings them both in, and he says yes, and Abram says yes, I am her brother, and he's like, well, I'll pay you off, and and if you don't take the deal, I'm just going to kill both of you. So this happens, and Sarah is taken into the palace, and over the next few days, all these bad things happen to the Pharaoh. This is God, right? This is the story of God punishing Pharaoh for messing with Abraham and Sarah. And at some point, the Pharaoh recognizes, like, what did I do recently that's caused me this? Because another thing that's really important in understanding the Old Testament is that their understanding in the ancient world was that a person who a person who um, if something bad happened to you, or if something good happened to you, you were it was all about um, God doing it to you or for you, right? So if something good happened to you, like the story of Noah, right? So God obviously approved of Noah because he survived. It wasn't just Noah surviving. In the old way of understanding it, they're attributing that to God. Or if something bad happens to you, you catch a rash or something, you're looking to see, well, what did I do? Right? We in reading Kushner, you saw that with the book of Job. Um, so in this sense, the Pharaoh comes down with these rashes and boils and stuff like that, and he calls Abraham back to the palace and says, "What did you do to me?" And Abraham's like, "Well, she wasn't my sister. We did that just to protect us, and she's actually my wife." Excuse me. And and that and so the Pharaoh's like, listen, here's her back, here's jewels, here's grain, just get out of here. Here's some slaves, and off they go. Right? Now he they get out and they go back home. So again, they were kind of shady, and God still had their back. So it wasn't really about Abraham being a good person. It was really about that covenant, about that agreement. And that's the main moral of the Old Testament, is that that I will be your God and you will be my people. Be faithful to me and I will be faithful to you. So as we as we move on in the story, you have one of those slaves was Hagar. And so now they were getting to the point where Abraham and Sarah are getting pretty old. And they're like, we're supposed to have descendants as many as the stars in the sky, and we don't have any children. That's kind of a problem. And God reassures them that yes, this is going to happen. But Sarah gets it in her head that she should probably do something about this. So there's um, an ancient rule, and it's super weird, that a slave could have um, could have a child with the master, and then when the slave was about to deliver her baby, the mistress, so Sarah would sit in a chair, and then the slave Hagar would sit in her lap and have the baby. And in that sense, then Sarah could claim the baby as hers. So they tried to do this, right? And so Hagar has this baby with Abraham, and this baby's name, this boy, is Ishmael, right? And things are going well, and Ishmael's a good kid or whatever. And Sarah gets a little jealous of the situation that um, that Abraham is spending so much time with Hagar. Um, and what ends up happening is finally you have Sarah conceives a son, and this is going to be Isaac. And this is an important part of this, because now Sarah's like, I've got to get rid of Ishmael. And so they take Hagar and Ishmael and send them out into the desert and to be done with them. So the true descendant, Isaac, could still have this connection. And this is very sad. Now the Ishmaelites eventually they go off, and it says that God sent angels to take care of them. So God did not desert them. And what we find is that Ishmael is eventually the ancestor of Muhammad, right? And so all of the descendants of all the Muslims come from the line of Ishmael, and they go back to Abraham. So you have the Jewish people, the Christian people, and the Muslim people all believe in the God of Abraham. It's the same God, which is super cool. And at, and at one point, the Pope wanted to take all of those leaders and do that and do a kind of um, uh,